Hi, Michael Miora from InfoSec Labs. 40 years in the cybersecurity business. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be in security for so long and a pleasure to be here on this podcast.
I really appreciate you being here. You've been in the business for 1989, but 40 years plus, you said before this conversation. You've been in the business for a very, very, very long time. In
Yeah,
1989 is when you started InfoSec Labs, right?
that's right. But I was in security before that. InfoSec Labs was when I finally decided that the world needed a security consulting firm. Today, the world doesn't need yet another security consulting firm. But back in those days, there weren't any.
Back
So
in those days, I don't think we
that's
had the technology. How many people were like even open to the concept of cybersecurity back then?
Well, today you have to convince people that you're the best choice. Back then, you had to convince people that they really needed to make a choice, that they needed to do something because security was not part of the vernacular. People did not realize at how much risk they were in their day to day business. So it was something that we needed to convince people of. And once we showed them, hey, here are the things you need to worry about, then it was easy from there.
Yeah. I mean, so I've got so many questions, and I was thinking through these questions that I had for you, and I had to remind myself that this is a business podcast. Like this is really just about how to start companies up and deal with like the new things that companies or people face today, and the businesses that can be formed around them, to take advantage of the new opportunities that exist. And whilst I was sort of, with that being sort of the anchor for these podcasts, thinking of cybersecurity, I can't help but just kind of go down the rabbit holes of like the threats, the type of threats that people face, that, how the new technologies out there, such as blockchain and AI, are changing the landscape, and what companies are going to have to do to navigate them, large and small. I mean, I feel like sometimes with me, when I think of cybersecurity, I think it's, as far as I'm concerned, usually it's just limited to like my credit card information, right? But then, and it's something that it's more the big companies have to deal with regards to like their huge amounts of data that they have to hide away. But like, I feel like that is shifting, kind of like how cybersecurity may 40 years ago may have been something that you had to convince people to consider. I feel like I'm also now considering it even as a small company, just with
Hmm.
the amount of things that are going on. So I feel like, as much as I want to ask you tons of questions about the fact how you started up your business, how you've survived for the last 40 years. Obviously, this has been an upward trend, because that in and of itself is a big achievement, especially in a world that's constantly changing like cybersecurity. I'm sure you've had to adapt a lot along the way. So I guess
A
if
lot,
you could just
yes.
tell us some stories.
I'd be happy to. I started InfoSec Labs, as you said a moment ago, in 1989, which, in terms of technology, is a million years ago, tons of generations ago. And people didn't look at things the same way. I'm reminded of somebody once saying, and this was about 20 years ago, um, people leave home without their cell phone and then run back home to get it. So there's this thing that didn't exist a few years before that now you can't leave home without it. To quote an ad from American Express, and you can't leave home without your phone. Everything is on your phone now. But today, that's not a surprise. Everybody knows it. A few years ago, it was a little bit different. People were still getting accustomed to the idea of having the world in their pocket, having all of their data in their pocket, on their phone, on their servers in the office, which they could access from their phone or from their laptop or from any Wi Fi access point at Starbucks or where have you. And that was a huge change that took people a long time to recognize. Specifically, what does it mean that I have this thing in my hand which has my whole life on it? What does that mean? It means that if somebody gets hold of it, I could be in trouble. So if I have my data on there, but I don't have any security on my phone, then it's at risk. So if the phone falls out of my pocket in a taxi, what do I do? Well, today we all know you have to have a PIN code for your phone. It can't be 4 digits, or it shouldn't be 4 digits. It should be longer. You should use biometrics like Face ID. There are all sorts of ways we protect these individual devices. But as an organization, big or small, you are allowing your users, and I shouldn't use the term users. Nobody is a user. People are people, right? So you let your people use their own device. And how do you know what they've done with it? So if we have what we call BYOD, bring your own device policy, and the own device is a Windows laptop or even a Mac laptop, then how do you know that it is secure? If you, the organization, aren't controlling it, it could be a sieve of some sort. So over the years, that's something that's become pretty well known. It's become pretty well known. And I see some clients, especially a bank I worked with recently, who is downright draconian about how they maintain security. You couldn't access anything directly, you have to access it through a portal. The portal was always unstable, the passwords always expired. It was a mess. It doesn't have to be a mess. There are easy ways to manage security so that people who are trying to get their jobs done can get them done well and without undue harsh controls.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
probably my number one message to my clients. Don't go over the
simplify.
board. Yeah, don't go overboard. Simplify is a good word.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I've seen. Well, I've been actually part of some large organizations where they have such stringent security measures with just passwords and things like that, where they have you change them every so often. And when I say so often, sometimes it's weekly, especially in the investment world. It was every week. So you'd think that in one hand, it would be a better way to have data protected. The passwords wouldn't just float around. The key logging software wouldn't be that effective over time. But the problem is, because it changes so often, and you could never use your previous password or a password that you've ever used before. You'd end up writing it down on post-it notes and in your notepads in your book, or in your phone, in your notes app on your phone. I feel like that just posed a bigger security risk over time, because there's different ways
Yes,
to access information. I think anyone, if we're talking about hackers, I'm sure they consider all of these things and think about it. Um, how
that's
how
part
has
of the
that
balance.
changed from? Go ahead.
That's part of the balance. You have to make, for example, with passwords, you have to make them strong enough that they're not easily guessable, but you have to make them flexible enough that people can remember them and use them. And I think we're looking at the end of the age of passwords. It's not tomorrow, it's not next week, maybe not even next year, but pretty soon we won't have passwords. Many places you go, instead of having to type a password, you type your username, and then you get some sort of a pop-up on your phone that says, "Hey, is this you?" Or "What's the number you see on your screen?" Or any of a number of options that make it so that the only person who can get in, ostensibly, is the person who's seeing the screen and has the phone. That's a huge benefit and a big stride forward from just a few years ago when multi factor authentication was considered the be all end all of security.
I feel like that kind of starts at like the largest organizations and kind of filters down. One thing I've noticed lately is like just my banking apps. Like when I make purchases online or even in store, sometimes I'll get a notification from my bank app asking me to
Mm-hmm.
confirm the purchase.
Yes.
It's actually interesting because recently I actually had my phone stolen. Um, it like literally out of my hand in the UK. I'm thinking, why on earth would you steal that phone? It's going to be bricked in like 5 minutes. Just let me get to a computer, and I get to another phone where I can contact Apple or sign into um, my iCloud account, and I can turn the phone off, or deactivate most of it. It
Right.
didn't actually work. First of all, things weren't happening. I was trying to make it shut off. And what they'd done is they'd very quickly been able to get my phone, I guess, into some other device that was blocking whatever this is that I was trying to do. And before I know it, I'm seeing emails, um, confirmation emails from one of these payment processes I was using, saying that, the payment confirmation 200, payment confirmation 500, payment confirmation 300. Like, holy crap, I'm starting to spend money. I'm not there using this thing. Like, how are they accessing my phone? I thought I had Face ID. I thought I had all this stuff, but it does happen. And it's
It
like you
does.
said, like there's a sieve, and it slips through the cracks. So as a consumer, as a user, as a person that wants this device to work, I'm at panic stations thinking that, you know, I'm at huge risk now. I'm not going to get my money back. I'm not going to be able to, deal with this situation effectively and quickly. Money's one thing, but then there's all my personal information in there. I don't want to have all of that out there. So it's like, how do I navigate this? So I'm looking to the organization. In this case, it was Apple, to kind of fix the issue. But then I start to realize, and as I have these conversations with people, I start to realize that, these attacks can happen with smaller businesses. It doesn't just have to be with the banking systems or Apple or large companies like that. Like, you'd think those are the first targets, but actually the easier targets are the smaller companies that still hold credit card information or financial information or company secrets and that sort of thing. And the acts of corporate terrorism are becoming more and more consistent these days. And even, like I said, at a small level. Are
That's
you seeing a
exactly
lot of that?
right. That's exactly right. In fact, my clients tend to be bigger companies rather than small companies, but I do work with small companies from time to time, especially when I help with go-to-market consulting, which is helping a small company grow and figure out how can they grow, what do they need to do, and security is always a part of that equation.
I was actually going
In
to ask you about that go-to-market strategy. Is that for companies building out their cybersecurity departments, or is that also helping companies position themselves within the cybersecurity market to provide cybersecurity services? Like, what is your thing there? How does that work?
a little of each. The helping companies build out their own security is less go to market as it is strategic consulting and security advisory consulting. Because what we're trying to do is help a company, whatever its mission is, whatever its product line is, make sure that they protect their intellectual property, their customer data, their sales information, and the like. That's different from go to market consulting, where I help companies that are building out security tools determine what's the right marketplace for them, what's the right pricing model, who should they try to sell to, where should they try to sell? Should they go to these big giant conventions or should they do something different? And the answer depends, uh, for the most part, on the kind of product it is and kind of funding there is. So go-to-market consulting is very different from strategic security advisory. These days we call that virtual CISO, VCSO, or security advisory as a whole, which is a more of a tactical kind of a security consulting practice. We do both of those, and we also do um, GTM consulting. What I was going to tell you was that regardless of the size of the company, there's a vulnerability that's very difficult to close, and you hear about it in the news almost every day. Some company, sometimes huge companies, and sometimes smaller companies, get attacked by ransomware. Ransomware gets in, it encrypts the data on your local drives, and you are basically out of business because you've lost access to all your information. Most organizations don't know how to prepare for that. They can put in protections, but you have to assume the protections will fail from time to time. So you have to have a backup plan. And a lot of organizations don't have that. So one of the things I ask with my clients when they say, don't worry, we've got our information backed up. First question I ask is, well, where is it backed up? And if you've been hit with a ransomware attack, can the ransomware wind its way into your backups and encrypt those too? Because if they encrypt the backups too, then you're completely out of luck. You have no way to recover until you pay the ransom. So it's a difficult problem, but it's one that lots of organizations face. Governments, big corporations, small corporations, everybody faces this ransomware problem.
And it's like, that's something that's evolved. Like, how long's that kind of thing been around? Is that just the flavor of the month right now, or like, I mean, I've heard of ransomware for quite some time. Like, I guess over the last
Yes.
maybe 8 to 10 years, I would say, if I'm digging into my memory banks. But I know that it's becoming more sophisticated over time. You see what's happened with, is it ransomware, and there's a few other types, isn't there? Like these other types of Trojan horses and like malware. What's the difference between malware and ransomware?
Well, ransomware is one particular kind of malware. What ransomware does is it somehow gets loaded on a system, and that system then, whatever other system it accesses, a server, a database, whatever it might be, the ransomware moves to those and encrypts those devices. So ransomware is a kind of a malware. But
Okay.
there are other kinds of malware, some of which just want to steal your information. Ransomware doesn't necessarily steal your information, it encrypts it, and the attacker may not have access to it. They only have access to the keys that you can use to decrypt the data. Interestingly enough, we're talking about businesses and how businesses work and what are the things businesses have to watch for. Well, the ransomware business is a business. And one of the things that the FBI tries to communicate to companies is if you decide that what you need to do is pay the ransom, you can be pretty sure that number one, the decryption will work and you'll get your data back. The first time that a major company gets hit by ransomware and they pay the ransom and don't get their data back, that whole business can fall apart. Not just for the one attacker, there are lots of attackers. So it's a business. The business model is you attack a company, you encrypt their data, you get their payment, you decrypt the data, and you move on. And usually you don't come back to the same company a second time. So it's a business. It's a business with a business model, if you will, a code of conduct. And so if you have to pay a ransom, you're probably going to get your data back. Of course, the best thing to do is to protect yourself so you don't have to, so you don't get hit by ransomware. And if you do, you have a way around the recovery. So one of the things I tell companies is, if you're going to have a backup, disconnect it from your network. So if you do a backup every day or every hour or every 15 minutes, whatever it is, um, if you get hit by ransomware, make sure that the devices that are hit by ransomware cannot reach the backups.
I feel like I've heard this kind of strategy being described on how to keep your cryptocurrencies safe, like having these cold wallets and like everything
Yes,
saved on a USB drive or something, like a flash drive, separate from your computer. And because you're always at risk, and if you have this cold wallet, it's going to be the place to, it's the safe way to keep your store the value that you're hoping to,
that's
keep
right.
safe. I feel like with that, okay, we'll get back to blockchain. I feel like that's progressing too fast, because one of the things if ransomware is like today's problem, um, these kind of software attacks, if we were to roll back to like the beginnings of when you started your company, I mean, you've had to adapt with consistent changes in technology. And I mean, I know there's only so much you can say because of the nature of your business. I mean,
Right.
cybersecurity, there's a clue in the name, right? But what were the kind of threats that you had to deal with when you first? So I know that 1989 is when you started InfoSec. What happened prior to that, before you started the business? What was the biggest challenge back then? And like, what, in terms of like the threat of security and it being cyber, as in, how did, yeah, give me a story there. I need to hear something.
So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
When I began, I was doing astrophysics for the Department of Defense, and my job was to help determine the best way to calculate orbits of satellites. Now, without getting too much into the detail, a low Earth orbiting satellite, which is all we had back then because we couldn't have cameras that took pictures from far away, they had to be pretty close. So that meant that the orbital period, the time it takes to have one circle of the orbit or one circuit of the orbit, was about 90 minutes. And it took close to an hour to calculate the orbit. Um, and the mean time between failure for the computer equipment was less than an hour. So put it all together and you say, okay, it takes an hour to calculate the next orbit, but our computers won't last an hour. They'll break down before an hour. So what do we do? So we had to come up with all sorts of interesting ways to do that calculation. Even if we got the data to the ground station just in time, the antennas that we used back then were 60-foot dishes. Imagine a 60-foot wide dish, because that's what it took to capture the image from the satellite in orbit. Compare that to today's, say, direct TV, 18 inches, and you get all you want.
Yeah.
It was very different back then. So there was an issue with how do you make sure you can predict the next orbit without making these giant antennas have to move faster than they can? And number two, how do you protect the downlink, the data coming down, from being either intercepted by the enemy, back then the Soviet Union, or the uplink from being scrambled to prevent us from commanding the satellite to do whatever we wanted it to do? These satellites had very low power.
So
And
just
so
to
there was no,
visualize it, this is a data packet that's being sent up to send instructions to satellites to do what they're going to do. And then information in a packet of data is almost being sent back down. And you just got this very small window to capture this thing. And if you,
right.
it's like it's just streaming information. And if you miss it, you've missed it. The
That's
information's
right.
gone.
That's exactly right. If once it's gone, it's gone. It's not like today where you can go back and do error correction and figure out what you missed. It's a very different world back then. And one of the things I found fascinating was how we protect the data. And we didn't have encryption because the satellite, the onboard computers on the satellites didn't have the power for encryption. My Apple Watch is more powerful than any computer on any satellite back then. So you can imagine that's not very much power. So we had to come up with ways, we have to devise ways to protect the data. And that's when we came up with the shared secret. Shared secret has been used for decades now as a way to protect data, these days by encryption. Those days by not encryption, but by obfuscation. So we did things like take the data and jumble it up in ways that you had to know how the hardware on the satellite worked in order to dejumble that data.
Oh,
Those are
wow.
called commutators and decommutators.
It's like the Enigma machine all over again.
Yeah, something like that. A little more powerful than that, but not
Yeah.
much.
Yeah. So it's jumbling information and then
Right.
dejumbling it, like
Yeah.
organizing yeah, okay. And so and when did you have your first sort of pivotal shift then when you've had to, so is that's when you started InfoSec to conduct?
No, that's way before I started InfoSec. That's when I got
Okay.
interested in security.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
from there, I went on and worked on different kinds of programs that were focused on security. So that in the 80s, there was this thing called the Morris worm. The Morris worm, I don't know if you've heard of that, is a worm the guy named Robert Morris built ostensibly as a test. He claimed always that he didn't do it to bring anything down. But in fact, it was a self replicating worm, which meant that when it went to a computer, it started making copies of itself and sending it to anything that was connected to it and copying itself there. And pretty soon, all the computers came crashing down because all they were able to run was the worm. And this was not over the internet, there was no internet. This is over the ARPANET, the predecessor. The
This
ARPANET
is
was
the
built.
closed, yeah, this is the closed internet, like just the net itself.
Exactly. The ARPANET was built to service defense contractors and universities and other research institutes. And so the thinking back then was, well, we're one happy family. We don't need to protect ourselves against each other because why would we want to hurt each other? But the Morris worm showed everyone that even if there was no intent to harm, harm could come and could cause major issues. And that was the opposite of zero trust. Today, everybody talks about zero trust. Don't trust anybody, anything. Back then, everybody trusted everything. And that's when things started to change, when they realized we have to have some gates, some fences, if you will, protections, filters, whatever the right word is. And that's how firewalls came to be. So between different um, parts of the network, there were firewalls, and the firewall said, "Oh, you're coming from here. Okay, you're a good guy. Come on in. And this is what you're trying to do. Okay, good. You're a good guy. Come on in." But if you didn't recognize what the connection was doing, what the packet was doing, it might be filtered out, and that was the beginning of reducing the trust that everyone had in everyone else, and that was in the 80s.
Wow. Okay. It's like gone are the secret handshakes. Like
Yeah.
now, yeah. So it's like, okay. And from a business perspective, when you're this interested you and you've gone ahead to make this a business model now. So this is not just, it's not only just piked your interest as a hobbyist, as someone who just is an enthusiast. You've now
Right.
decided to wrap a business model around it. Like, did you have to go like, was there a lot of prospecting from your part? Like trying to convince people like, hey, listen, I need the contract. I need the work. We can deliver this kind of result, protect you in this way. Or were you in high demand, would you say? Like, was it just like through your referral network, or
In,
how did you start your company up in some, and the reason I
in
asked
the
is just to give you
beginning,
context.
in the beginning, there was a lot of prospecting
Okay.
because people basically didn't know what they didn't know. They didn't know what they needed. So I reached out to various companies, to people I knew, and little by little it started to grow. And then at the same time, people started to realize what they need. Companies started to realize what they need. And as different kinds of technologies grew up, everything from online payments to e commerce to um, inventory control. So, for example, there was one company, and I probably shouldn't say who they were, but it was a very long time ago. Maybe I can, but I won't.
Just
one,
in
it,
case.
they always call themselves the world's biggest print shop. And what they did was they worked with the major office supply companies like Staples and Office Depot and Office Max, and they would replenish the shelves remotely by having people in the company scan the number of everything they had on a regular basis. That would be transmitted to the company, the supplier, who would then automatically ship what they needed based upon parameters that the store specified. So if they wanted to have always X number of reams of this kind of paper, this company would put that into their system. So if they went below 2 reams, just making up a number, they would get some more to refill them back up to 10 reams or whatever it might be. And that suddenly made communication and security a critical factor. Because if I could somehow um, disturb that process, then the supplier wouldn't know what to do, and the buyer, the retail store, would lose faith in that supplier. So if I was company X and I was making paper, and you were company Y and you were making paper, if you could mess up my ordering system, my supply system, then they would probably go to you and say, okay, we'll buy quantity from supplier Y. After all, one paper is just about much the same as another. Not completely true, but close enough. So those are the early kind of issues that we had. That was before people paid with credit cards on the phone or on their mobile devices. It was very different and very lower probability of events, but very high impact. And that's where things got going and why I started InfoSec Labs, because I saw companies just didn't recognize what they needed to do.
I see. Okay. So you've got, so this is a service driven business. You're dealing with this new wave of sort of corporate espionage almost. That's what was ringing in my head as you were saying that. It sounds like it. Um, it's kind of crazy. So if that's what you're dealing with then, when did the next wave of technology come in that forced you to kind of upgrade what you do? Like, did you always have to have did you have like techies and hackers internally to deal with this, or was it just a team of consultants that would outsource and build your business consistently, dealing with these new threats or changes? Or did you have like this close knit team, like this think tank that could deal with this? How did that look?
Back then, we had the close-knit team. We had a penetration testing laboratory that had a number of computers and lots of modems and lots of internet connections, the best we could get, and we would do the testing. So if a company asked us, how secure are we? Where are our holes? We could do a penetration test and tell them. Today, that's very common and very easy. Back then, you had to have specialists who did things manually. Today, there are tools that do that, and you don't need so much the specialists to do it, though you do need them sometimes. But back then, that's all we had. So that's what
Okay.
we provided.
So you've okay. And the evolution is, well, it's constantly happening. It's constantly evolving
Right.
as far as evolutions of industries go. There's been no stagnation there, unless there has been. Was there ever a quiet time where business was easy, or was it always a challenge for you? Because you
Always a
think
challenge.
companies get to a point where there's like this maturity rate where we've kind of got this, we know what we're doing, we can just kind of coast for a few years and stack the cash. Like, did that ever happen in your sector, or was it always
No,
like? I think
never.
so.
It's always a cat and mouse game, an arms race between the attacker and the defender. And one of the things that we always tell people is, you know, the defender has to be right always. The attacker only has to be right once. So if I'm attacking a company, I have to find one hole. Once I get in, I'm in. And I can move around laterally from system to system once I breach their network. But the defender, they can't just close that one hole. They have to close all the holes, or as many as they can find. And it's a very different mindset. It it grew over the years to where now companies understand that they're going to be hacked. There's a famous expression that says there are two kinds of companies in the world: those who have been hacked and those who don't know it yet. So, in fact, almost every company's had some sort of an issue, and if you don't have the right tools, you'll never know. So, one of the things we help companies do is figure out what you need to do, what you need to put in place, how do you need to use your tools to make sure if somebody gets in, you know it.
Okay, now you've got blockchain and AI in the mix. How does that change things? I mean, it's like you've got, it's almost like technology that's there to, I mean, you talked about data being encrypted with certain types of malware like ransomware, but then you've got people talking about blockchain where it can, even if it's encrypted on one side and you can't access it, it's kind of decentralized so that information has backups in other
Right.
domains and places. So there's that element to it, but then there's also the people that are getting really good at using blockchain to conduct the attacks as well, and hide where these attacks are coming from what I understand with my limited knowledge of this space. And then there's AI that can kind of supercharge everything and do it in like, it's kind of like, how do you see this? Like, do you like, okay, it's time to check out, I'm done with it, like, or do you still see these challenges as something that you're building on? Or
The challenges are growing all the time. And I think that, well, that's part of what makes it fun. It makes it fun for me to see what's new and to help organizations figure out how they need to protect themselves. Some of the work, I'll say, is actually a little mundane. I don't like to use the word boring, so I'll say mundane. Um, but a lot of it requires some real creative thinking to solve the problem. So there's a company I did some work for a few years ago, and they called me and they said, "We think we've been breached." Well, why do you think you've been breached? Well, we're not sure, but we had a system that ran out of disk space. I said, and you didn't expect it to run out of disk space? I said, no, we thought we put in plenty. Well, that's a telltale sign. So we came in with a team and we looked around, And we found that yes, in fact, they had been breached, and they had been breached uh, over a year earlier. And I know it was over a year earlier because they had logs that they maintained that only went back a year. And if you went back to the beginning of that year of logs, we saw it had already been breached. So they had lived with this attacker in their environment for a year. And the only way to go through and fix the problem was to rebuild everything:
Oh wow.
servers, workstations, everything on the data center, in the cloud, in people's homes. Everything had to be rebuilt from scratch in order to stop the attack. Because what they tried to do was um, they tried to stop the leak by fixing one server at a time. And what they realized was the attacker was spreading to new servers faster than they could fix the compromised servers. So that was a lose lose proposition. There was no way to solve the problem. So what they had to do was take down whole swaths of servers, and they had lots of them. They probably had, in this particular organization, 5,000 servers, mostly in data centers and some in the cloud. And they had to just bring down pieces of the network one at a time, rebuild everything as fast as they could, and bring it back up. And sometimes after they brought it back up, they saw a compromise again, and then they could point to the C2C or CNC command and control um, server that had been compromised and one they hadn't yet fixed. So once they saw that, they could fix that one, and then things calmed down. But they had to do that multiple times. So it's a very difficult job, a lot of manual work, and a lot of good analysis to get that done.
Wow. Okay. And how would that and what sort of time frame was this? Is this now? Was this was this a couple years back?
That was a couple of years ago.
How would AI play into that now then? Like, do you think if you had that same case study, that same scenario, and you had AI on your side, like there's conversations I've read about where people are saying instead of just worrying about AI being the attacker, you could use it on as the white knight, or so to speak, as the thing that goes the antivirus is to be
Yeah, that's what I was saying a minute ago. It's an arms race between the attacker and the defender. If the
right.
defender uses AI, you bet that the attacker is going to use more AI. And then the defender will have to use more AI, and it grows and grows in terms of the power of the AI they can use. And again, the attacker only has to be right once. So if they tune the AI and they can get in, then they're in. The defender has to tune the AI to prevent all of the entry points. And that's again where it's very difficult to make, I'll call it a hermetically sealed border, because there is no such thing. And speaking of borders, we used to talk about the network perimeter. We knew what the perimeter was. You were in a data center and you had your servers inside the data center, and you had the internet connection coming in from the outside, and there were firewalls and intrusion prevention systems and other things between the outside and the inside. And that was great. You could filter the data and stop attacks. But today we don't have a perimeter. If I have my iPhone or if I have my laptop at home, where is my perimeter? Now the perimeter is no longer a physical barrier. The perimeter is more of a logical construct that requires even more analysis for protection.
It's not just
So
behind a locked door anymore.
that's right. So the loss of the perimeter was a major issue.
That's crazy. I think we were writing our privacy policy recently for a software that we're building, and it was like we had a template, and the template had it was like we store data behind the locked door in a locked box. It's like, well, okay, I can't believe this is in a contract or this is in a term sheet. That this is actually like some of the most basic things that people that are expected of you, but it doesn't actually go into like the details. It doesn't actually require when you look at all these templates out there. Even when I've spoken to legal counsel to have help create these things, they never really get into like serious detail about the type of antivirus or firewall protection that you need. It just says adequate firewall, adequate protection
Yes.
from internet threats and that sort of thing.
Well, there's a good reason why the lawyers say that. If they put into the policy you have to use antivirus XXX, then you are bound to use antivirus XXX, even if there's a better antivirus that comes along. So a few years ago, this was probably 7 years ago, I was using one particular antivirus, which was the best in the business. It was the golden answer. And so I advised the company to get rid of what they had and get this instead. And I don't want to use the name for a reason to become clear in a moment. So we migrated away from the older product towards this newer product, which worked like a champ. It really solved the problem for about 2 years. And after that, it no longer solved the problem because there were new sets of attacks. You can call them attack vectors, if you will, or surface areas of attack. And no longer could antivirus rely on a file and on a file configuration to detect a virus. There were these fileless attacks. I won't go into details of what they are, but they're these fileless attacks, and this software was excellent at finding files that were suspect. But once there were no files to be found, it fell down. So we had to move to yet another product that had incorporated that. And that new product was it 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 grew so fast that it overshadowed this other one. This other one was the one to have until it wasn't. So you can never rest on your laurels. So to go back to your other question, there's never a time to relax. There's always something new.
Oh, I can see that. I can see that being the case. Like what kind of like when you got someone like me, a novice in the business. I mean, my experience has been I've worked for companies where we've had our entire client list stolen. Big boss will come in and say someone opened an email, it had this kind of folder in it, and they clicked it, and 2 days later their entire database of clients are gone, all the financials, everything. Well, I mean, I've been part of companies where that's happened, and we've just kind of been looking around like, don't know what to do about that information now. So what's next? But what are like when people come to you and ask you, and I suppose the people that are coming to you are the larger companies, so you may not get this that much. But as far as misconceptions, like myths about cybersecurity, in terms of what people think the problems are, like what are the most? Would you say like what would you say the most common are, like as far as like misconceptions are, like and what it really is?
One of the biggest um, one of the biggest issues the companies face is not knowing what data they have and where it is. So where do you store your sensitive information? What sensitive information do you have? And how did it get there? So the data security tools that are now coming to the fore and becoming more and more commonplace and more effective, they go through your network and your connections, whether it's email or in your network traversing different servers. Those products can detect what sensitive data you have. And that's a big deal. But they're not there
So this
yet. They're
stuff
not
reads,
finished.
it reads, it goes through your data, like without stealing everything straight away. It can actually identify what's valuable and what's not.
That's right. That's right. And the way it does that is by learning. Talk about artificial intelligence. It learns a little bit at a time what kind of data you have. So you help it get a jump start, but it looks for patterns it knows, and based upon the patterns it knows and the traversal of the data, it can make some healthy guesses and give you better protections than you could have even devised yourself. And that's a big thing. And there's one company in Israel that's a big deal at that called Cyera, Cyera. They've grown by leaps and bounds. Back in RSA of this year, which was what, March? They were in a tiny booth at RSA, but they took off. So by the time Black Hat came along, when was that? October? I don't remember. They had a giant booth because everybody realized that they do this thing that everyone needs. They're not the only ones, but they're the best one at the moment. So that's a big deal. That's one of the ways that you can protect yourself. You have to find what needs protection and then protect it. And how do you protect it? You have to see where it's going, stop it if it shouldn't be going out of the environment, stop it if it shouldn't be stored in email. Because as so many people know, your email store, whether it's Microsoft Office 365 or anything else, that mail store carries the keys to your kingdom because if somebody sends it to somebody else, it lives there forever. So
Wow.
now companies getting to the point where saying, no, you can't leave it there forever. We have to have email that expires and gets automatically deleted and so on. But if you tell me you're going to delete my email that's older than, say, 3 years old, I'm probably going to get upset. And you can't do that. That's how I maintain track of all the things I've done.
Yeah, that's how I
So,
reset all my passwords. It goes to that email.
oh,
And
wow.
right? Oh god, there's like
Yeah,
ancient
my
emails that
email
I've had.
password.
Yeah, there's ancient emails that I have that I have to keep on revisiting every now and again because I go for a password reset and it goes, "This is the email that you set this account up initially with." I'm like, God, that was 4 emails ago. I've got to go back
Yeah, yeah.
there. I need the password for that email account. So you
Right.
go through this process of just going through password reset.
So
Um,
you can imagine how difficult it is for an organization of any size, even a small or a modest organization, has all those issues. And how do they keep track of it? How do they remember what needs to be changed, what needs to be changed, and so on? And it's
yeah,
shocking to me that some organizations don't even use a basic security capability. If they're a Windows shop, they don't use Active Directory, which is
what is
which
that?
is shocking to me. Active Directory is a tool where when you get an account on that network, you're entered into the Active Directory. The Active Directory specifies password requirements. How long do they have to be? How complex do they have to be? How often do you need to change them? To what do these various accounts have access? And to what do they not have access? Active Directory is a magical tool to maintain all of that. As with any
It's
magical
interesting. Is
tool,
this a framework or is this something like an actual plugin, like a software? What is
uh,
that?
it's
Is it
actually
like
a
a
Microsoft product.
okay?
So Active Directory is a
It's like
Microsoft product.
software is the thing that people go. Okay, this is a good question because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, I'm visualizing, I'm trying to like relate to things in my life where I can see these things in effect. And one of the things I'm realizing is that you start to rely on software more and more to actually plug these holes. Like if you go and set up a new account anywhere on any kind of platform right now, you're gonna, if you're using Chrome, it's gonna give you, hey, do you want a password suggestion? Here's this crazy looking password that we know you're never going to remember. And then
Right.
you can save it in the Chrome browser with a password that you probably made so simple to access all your other passwords. It's like this little password bank. Um, and then you've got like you've given an example, and that's just as on a consumer level. Then you've got active directories on the business end of things that kind of
Yes.
forces these changes consistently.
Well, you just
Um,
hit upon the reason that I don't like passwords at all, and
yeah,
why I see that in the next couple of years they're going to diminish and maybe not go away in a couple of years, but pretty soon. But they're going to be more rare. So that if you go to your banking app, instead of typing in a password, you'll type in your username. Then it'll pop up a number. That's one of the things that the Microsoft system does. Pop up a number, could be any number, 37. Then you go to your phone and you get a message, and the phone says, "What number do you see?" And you type in 37, and that's your
okay.
authentication. That way, you have this two-way view that's required.
Yeah, like
And
these authenticator apps that I've been using lately for a lot of banking apps.
that's one. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Microsoft has an authenticator. Google has an authenticator.
yeah,
Everybody and his uncle has an authenticator. And now the next thing is going to be to make sure they're all compatible.
yeah.
So, yeah.
That's yeah. Okay. Um, So what does the small company like? So I have a consulting firm, and I also have a little soft SaaS product that I'm building. Like how much effort, how much resource should I put towards cybersecurity? Is it just about making sure that my servers, I pay for the antivirus malware protection upgrade, or do I do more than that? Like, is it something that people really? Because I see the thing is you've gone through over 4 decades of this, and you've seen this constant change, this trajectory. Now, anyone doing something like that long enough, you'll get a feel for how things are. Like, well, how do you see the future with, you know, I know you can't predict, but how do you see the smaller businesses having to deal with this? Is it more of just do whatever you need to do, figure it out as you go, or are there some basic principles that you would recommend that people do?
Well, both. There are some basic things you have to do. You have to have the basic controls in place that prevent people from breaking into your system by guessing passwords or by sending information out or by sending files in. There's some basic things you need to do. But one of the great things about the cloud, and it doesn't matter which cloud, but one of the great things about putting your applications in the cloud is the cloud has gone through a great deal of trouble, whether it's AWS or GCP, which is Google, or Azure, which is Microsoft, and AWS, of course, is Amazon. They've all gone through a great deal of effort to provide you with the security tools you need. The shocking thing is how often smaller companies don't know about these tools, so they don't make use of them. If they knew about them, they could make use of these tools and protect themselves a lot more effectively, a lot more, um, I guess, cost effectively than if they tried to hire people to build that capability in a data center. So I think as we go more and more to the cloud, and data centers are not dying, but they are dying down a little bit. So I think as we move more to the cloud, there'll be better protections available.
Okay. And so just to define, and this is maybe me being a bozo here, data centers, well, when I'm trying to imagine what a data center is versus what a cloud is aren't cloud systems just multiple data centers just plugged in, networked in together, or what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Okay.
We techies, we tend to talk about it as though everybody knows the difference.
Yeah.
So here we go. Data
Okay.
center, the building, a building that has its own power. It's got its own internet feeds, usually multiple power grids, multiple internet feeds, and you rent space in there. And the space you rent is actually a cage. You get your very own cage, literally, a metal cage.
Okay.
You put your stuff in there, and you get plugged in, and everybody knows what your IP address is. In other words, your physical address. They know what it is, and it's up to you to protect it.
It's like a bank with a vault.
Exactly.
Okay.
The cloud is very different. First of all, you don't rent a cage in the cloud. You don't buy a server for the cloud. Now, Amazon has tons of servers, and there's GCP and Azure, and their servers are very sophisticated. But you, as a company, you don't have to worry about the cage. You don't have to worry about the ingress and egress into the cloud, even though the cloud really is, as you said, a data center. So one of my friends said a few years ago when we were joking around, he said, "Yeah, the Amazon cloud, yeah, that's in Virginia." Well,
Yeah,
it
right. That's
is.
what I've been told. Yeah, it's like when you start
Yeah.
to look at the locations of them, it's like that's a cloud data center, that's a cloud data center. They're just all networked together.
That's right. So they might be in Virginia, but they're also all over the world. And
Yeah.
all the data centers are interconnected. If anything happens in any one data center, they can fail over. And you as a business have to decide how much resiliency do you need? How much protection do you need? And you can buy that protection. It's not seamless. You still have to do work as a small company, but there are companies, um, even AWS itself offers some consulting services to help you get what you need. And the reason they do that is that they have a marketplace. So you go in and you say, I've got this load I need to protect. How do I do that? Well, it's well, you buy an elastic load balancer. But where do I buy that? In the Amazon Marketplace. This is what you go buy. And when you install it will help you configure it so you get just what you need. So
Yeah.
in the old days, if you had a load balancer, it was a physical device that balanced the load from one server to another or between servers. In the cloud, it's very different. It's the same concept, but it's very different. You're not worried about pipes. There are also new issues with cloud computing. For example, if I'm in a data center and I have two of my servers talking to each other, the wire that connects them is in my cage. I don't have to worry about somebody cutting into that wire. They can't get to that cage. They can't change that wire, so I'm safe. But if I'm in the cloud and I've got two servers that talk to each other, they're talking to each other over a path that's accessible to thousands of other companies. So then I have to take those extra precautions to make sure that path can't be, I call it hijacked or in any way corrupted. So there's slightly different problems, but I'll take the cloud problems over the data center problems anytime.
And, okay. And with cybersecurity, would that be? I guess where I'm leading to this, where I'm leading to with this question is, would that be where the main focus is now? If we have people, so you mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that now, in the very beginning, it was very difficult to get someone to buy into the idea of cybersecurity to begin with, and now it's a really saturated market, right?
Yes.
So would you still say it's a good market to get into for like new companies? And if they did, would they be best positioned to focus on providing security for the cloud, these data centers, or would there be some more fundamental, like basic fundamentals that they should be focusing on if they were to start up in this space?
Well, it's clearly still a good place to be because there's so many companies that go there and then make a fortune. Because if you build a good product, whatever your company is, whatever your product is, if you build a product that's very, very good at doing some particular small set of things, you're probably going to be bought out by one of the giants, and then you'll be very happy. The trick is knowing what needs to be done and how to do it and how to get it to market, which is where go to market consulting comes to play.
I see. And go to market, when you say go to market, that's getting it out there to the audience, the target audience you're going for, the consumer model or the enterprise model, right?
Right. So what happens is that let's say I've got a new product that I just built, and I'm testing it out. I'm going to get funding, trying to build it out. Build it out meaning get it to work correctly and so on. Um, those companies are often in what's called stealth mode. They don't reveal who they are or what they're doing, and their venture capitalist friends, the VCs, also don't advertise what they're doing so long as they're in stealth. Once they get to a certain point, boom, the lid's off. And now they're no longer in stealth and they start advertising what they do and trying to place it at various companies and trying to get a foothold in the marketplace. But whatever it is they're trying to build, they have to focus on the market segment they want to penetrate. Are you going after home workers and securing them? Are you going after cloud computing? What are you going after? Is it the data you're going after? Like I mentioned, Sierra, they're going after the data. So wherever your data is, they want to find it. And that's their secret sauce, if you will.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The reason I asked that question was a conversation I had with a guy called Eric Menzel. Um, he owned a company, Veil VPN, and one of the biggest challenges that he said he's currently facing was he built a direct to consumer model or a consumer model, I should say, not direct to consumer model, just a consumer focused VPN service. He had the opportunity, it's a great business model for like VPN where it has like self destructing servers and stuff like that, which is how do you do that? I'm just sort of picturing like a Mission Impossible movie where like somewhere some data center something explodes like that was my server, but then like what he was actually talking about was the fact that when he speaks to VCs, uh, basically to access capital, people who have funds to invest into the space, cybersecurity, he was saying that there's over 100 billion plus of available funds for cybersecurity pretty much anywhere you look.
Yes.
The trouble is, not $1 of it is usually available for the consumer models. It's all for the enterprise because, well, and I think probably if we're just guessing here, it's probably because of the liability. Because cybersecurity for consumers allows them to, hide themselves for the most part, encrypt actions that they're doing. Because what does cybersecurity means? It means to, for the most part, it means to withhold information and compartmentalize and separate. And they don't really want that for the consumer model, and it's rife with liability. So if there was a place to position, it would be with the enterprise model only, because that they could get behind, because that's something that's bankable.
And not only is it bankable and is the risk more manageable, but enterprises grow. And if I buy a widget from this new company and I'm an enterprise, I'll end up buying more widgets over time and thousands of widgets over time. Consumer model, every sale is a new sale. And so it's much harder to push things out rather than sell on top of what you've already done to get more business.
Wow. Okay. So do you think if you had to start over again, would you go down the road? It's like too much to ask now.
Oh, God.
Like if you had to pick, like, if you've only got so much time in the day, you've only got so many people that can work with you, you've only got so many resources that you can allocate. Um, what would you do? Would you go down? What would be your target? Would it be the AI system? Would AI be your the thing to go for right now, or would it be blockchain? Let's work with that, or because it can't just be a combination of everything, even though it is everything.
Well, my target would be to invent what I know is going to be invented later.
Well, that's awesome. If you could do that.
The Wayback Machine, right?
Yeah, the Wayback Machine. All right. Well, this has been great. I feel like I'm at a loss. Usually, normally the conversations I have about business is just pure startup stuff. This has been really insightful and eye opening. It's like it's one of the rare opportunities I have to really dive into something that I'm not familiar with. But I actually think that there's a lot of opportunity here as well. Like it's one of those things where it's because it's constantly, if you watch the news for longer than 15 minutes, you're going to hear something about cybersecurity.
Yes.
You're going to hit someone got hacked. Russia did this thing with Ukraine and they stopped him from being able to communicate. And then Elon Musk swooped in with the Starlink, and so they had this thing. And this was the safeguard that's now becoming. So this is the next thing to reduce the risk of even people attempting those kind of attacks, because you now have infrastructure to resort to. So it's like, why put the effort into creating these attacks in the first place if there's always a backup system in place that you can just shift to. But I think what I'm getting at is so much there when people think about what can I do to really make a difference as well. If someone steals your phone, how vulnerable do you feel? Well, that's probably a very good business to be in if you can stop that from happening, or if it does happen, to reduce the amount of the damaging effects that can ensue. So
On
I
the
think,
iPhone, there's already a company that does that.
oh yeah,
Apple.
well, I mean, to be honest, they had accessed my phone. They had gotten into it.
It
Whoever it was, they
depends.
whatever they plugged it into, whatever they did, they got into the phone. They didn't have full access because those were attempted wires in the end, but they were trying them. They were
Yeah.
trying to, not wires, but they were charging the card. They were trying to charge a card, and the card, the banking side of it blocked it. But they got into the phone and they were trying to use the stuff. So that was worrying.
Yeah. Some of it, and heaven forbid I suggest that you've done something wrong, but the protections you put on your phone are everything.
Yeah.
So people put in a password, a passcode. Well, if you don't put in a passcode, you're done. As soon as I get your phone, you're done. If I put in a short passcode, like 4 characters, then there's some protection. But the encryption of the phone, and the iPhone is encrypted at rest, The encryption on the phone uses your PIN code. So if you use a 4-digit PIN code, it's modest encryption. It can be broken. If you have a 6-character PIN code, the encryption is almost unbreakable. So how you configure your phone plays a large role in what you do and how secure you are.
Oh wow! So just having that fifth digit,
Fifth or sixth, yeah.
fifth or sixth, make all
Yeah.
the difference.
Yeah.
But don't just have it 00000. Like, it's got to
Yeah.
don't be that person. Got it. Okay. Well, like I say, I feel like there's so much there. There's an opportunity for businesses to start up in, and to have this conversation with you, someone who's been in the business for 40 plus years, can show that you can it's constantly changing. There's never a dull
It
day,
is.
and
It's constantly changing, yes.
it's a growth market, so, so to speak.
Yeah.
So if you want to pick
I don't think I'll
something,
make it another 40 years, but I think there's another few good years left.
well, so are you planning anything new? Are you in regards to how you offer, or is it right now just the go to market strategies for your business?
Right now, I'm just continuing the consulting because
Yeah,
I'm still like that a lot. So that's what I'm doing.
awesome. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's
Um,
my pleasure. I appreciate you having me here.
appreciate your patience with these novice questions, but I feel like I'm asking some of the questions that I think at least I definitely need the answers to, but I think other people might be in the same boat too, because wealth of information here. You know what would be really cool? I think if we had, see, I've got a couple of other podcasts lined up. I've had some with Eric Menzel with Veil VPN, and there's a few others in the space of they have offerings for uh, that are within the whole cybersecurity arena. It would be really cool to have a panel discussion. With maybe
Yes.
three or four of us. We pick a focal point. Like, let's talk about this new thing with AI, and then have that be the anchor for the conversations, and then we just all kind of just engage in it. I mean, I'll just sit there like a referee, perhaps, just. But I'm
That
going to be
sounds like
sitting.
fun.
Yeah,
Come
I'll sit
in.
there studying, looking for a new. And while you're all talking, I think me and everybody else that's watching could sit there with a pen and paper, looking for the actual business opportunity. Like, where can I kind of just slip in and monetize here? I think that's definitely something to look forward to.
Okay.
All right, Michael. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you and have a good rest of the day.